I wanted to thank both Linda and Mark for reaching out to us at NEH and inviting us today to talk a little bit about some of our specific grant programs for individual scholars. And then also, Mark said there might be interest in challenge grants and our digital humanities specific programs. And we're really happy to have the opportunity to talk to you all about that. And happy to answer questions. At any point, you can, Meaghan also will be talking about how to handle questions in chat, but you can also just stop us if we're talking, and we try to answer. And obviously, we won't have time to talk about. We have more than 30 grant programs at NEH, so we're just zooming in on a few of these today to talk about. I'm Mary Macklem. I'm a program officer at the National Endowment for the Humanities, and I've served at NEH since 2013 in the Division of Research Programs. My background is in musicology. My dissertation was on Italian opera and public theaters, particularly in Venice in the 17th and 18th centuries. Mm-hmm. So I love my work at NEH, and one of the best parts is meeting potential applicants and telling you about our grant programs. And I'm so pleased that my colleague Meaghan Brown is also here to talk to you. And Meaghan, if you'd like to go ahead and say a few words also about yourself and background.
Hi, I'm Meaghan Brown. I'm also a program officer in the research division at the NEH. I joined the NEH almost a year ago, so my anniversary is coming up. My background is in book history. I specialized in early modern printers and how they talked about printing. I've also got a background in digital project management and actually served at the Folger Shakespeare Library under an NEH grant, not from the research division. So I will be talking a lot about the digital things today.
Great. So with that, let's go ahead and just launch into it. So I have a screen about the NEH, and I don't know how much you know about the agency, but we are a government agency. We were founded by Congress in 1965, and we support work that supports a broad range of projects in the humanities. This is language from our founding legislation, and it gives you a bit of the breadth of how we define the humanities at NEH. Behind this text are some of the projects we've funded since 1965. But you can see from the text that we consider language, modern and classical, linguistics, literature, history, jurisprudence, philosophy, archaeology, comparative religion, ethics, history, criticism, and theory of the arts. And then also the social sciences, which have humanistic content and employ humanistic methods. So we have really quite a capacious understanding of the humanities at NEH. Since 1965, we have funded over 66,000 projects, so we're very proud to share that number with you. And we have a number of wonderful projects with that are indexed on our database if you're interested to see more about that. Today, I wanted to, with Meaghan, give you an overview of how the NEH is organized, because it helps you perhaps understand who you should call, or the kind of grant programs that we do offer and the kind of support you might be able to find. We are organized in 7 different offices or divisions, almost like different departments on a university. And each of us, these divisions and offices, have different missions at the NEH and offer specific grant lines under these names. Today, Meaghan and I are going to look a little bit at the challenge grants opportunities, digital humanities opportunities, and research programs. And the other 4 areas, we also have some great programs there. We just wouldn't have the time today to talk about those. But should you be interested in projects in those areas, we are happy to answer any questions about that today or at a later point as well. So just first starting with the Division of Research Programs, for Meaghan and myself, that's our home division. So we know the most about the programs in this division and are happy to talk at length about these. We'll try to keep on point and not go too long. But our mission in the Division of Research Programs is to support scholars, individuals, and collaborative teams working together on research projects that advance knowledge and understanding of the humanities. Um, we support both affiliated scholars who have an institutional home, adjuncts, independent scholars, and the whole range. Um, Today, to just take a look at what are some of the grant offerings we have in the Division of Research. I've highlighted the five that we are going to be briefly touching on this morning because Mark indicated there was an interest in fellowships and individual scholar funding. So we have quite a few options there, and we will talk about those as well as what are some of the differences between these programs, which is a question sometimes Meaghan and I get asked. The other area is collaborative research or research done by more than one individual, and those are considered grants for institutions. And you can see in that list there, we won't be taking time today to talk about those, but are very happy to work with you or talk to you about those either in questions or later. In the grants for institutions, the idea there is that your institution actually applies to the NEH. There is a primary investigator or the project director who would lead the project, the lead scholar for collaborative research, for example, but that is routed through your institution. And so we make this distinction, grants for individuals, where you put in the application. In most cases, you put in the application yourself under your own grants.gov account. Versus the grants to institutions, which usually would go through an office of sponsored research or some other office on campus who can help you put in that application. So with that, the other element to look at is what kinds of work gets funded through Division of Research programs. Because as I mentioned, we have different missions in our 7 offices and divisions at NEH. So our focus is in research in the humanities. And the typical products that result from such support are what you might envision are articles and monographs, multi-authored volumes, translations, scholarly editions, and scholarly digital projects. I should also say through the first program I'm going to talk about, we do support individual undergraduate course revision projects done by an individual, but that is a little bit unusual. So I'll just talk about that with respect to the one program where we do support that kind of research. Activities, again, it's the whole gamut of the research process, whether you need to travel to archives, whether you need to do research in digital libraries and sit in your home office, whether you've already written a draft of your manuscript and you're needing time to revise the manuscript, working with other scholars, which often takes more time because of the logistics of that, so the collaborative aspect. Scholarly editing, we have had a program for a long time that supports scholarly editing. Whether it's an individual project you're doing yourself, you can apply to fellowships as an individual, or if you're working with more than, someone, if you're working with 2 or more people, you can apply through our scholarly editions and translations. As an example, many of the presidential papers have been supported as scholarly editions projects for decades at NEH. And then lastly, we also support scholarly gatherings, convenings, in the idea that if it's not regular recurring meetings of an academic society, but something that's about a humanities research project that perhaps relates to, a collaboratively written book or a topic in the humanities that you want to explore with other scholars. So those are the kinds of activities that can be supported through the range of grant programs in the Division of Research. So just to launch into that, the yellow highlighted programs from that first screen. So now we're looking at individual research grants and what are some of the differences in these and what are the different programs NEH offers in these areas. And one of the common questions that we often hear is, which program should I apply to? And so I would just encourage you, and I'll probably say this and Meaghan will say it, and by the end you'll be wishing we'd stop, but please give us a call at any point. or email. Right now, it's best to email, and we can set up a call just because we're still not working for the most part in the office itself. But we're very happy to talk with you about your project, about your plans for it, about any questions you have about what kind of program, which program is the best for this project. And in some cases, it could be that there's two programs that would work. In other cases, there's a clear preference for a particular program. So we're very happy to talk to you at any stage of your process in preparing an application to NEH. That's another great aspect of our job is working with potential applicants. So that's a little preface to this awards for faculty at HBCUs, HSIs, and TCUs program. This is an individual fellowships program that the goal of it is to strengthen the humanities by supporting individual research of faculty or staff at federally designated institutional types, Hispanic serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, and tribal colleges and universities. And I wanted to start with this one because I know that University of Illinois at Chicago is often would be eligible for an HS to apply as a HSI institution. And so the thing to mention also about this one is we will read draft proposals for this program. And usually it's 6 to 8 weeks before the deadline, which is in April. So looking ahead, we'll likely be accepting drafts again in the next year, and thinking about January, early February would probably be the time to think about having a draft proposal ready to send in if you're interested in having staff comment on your proposal. Um, it's a flexible program, so I've used the word flexible twice in the slide because this is something that makes this program stand out from some of our other fellowships programs in that it's flexible in work plan. You can work part-time, you can work full-time, you can work in combination, so full-time in the summer and part-time in the academic year and back to full-time, up to 12 full-time months or the part-time equivalent. So if you were working 50% of your time for all the time for that, you could have potentially 24 months of half-time work support through this program. Where this program is also flexible in the project types. So we often see book projects, monograph projects, scholarly editions, translations, databases, all done by an individual since it funds the individual. But in addition, you can apply to do humanities research that also could support a different kind of end result, such as an undergraduate course revision, where you're looking at incorporating new primary sources that haven't been available to your students before, and you need to do the research because some of these are maybe still in archives, and you want to bring this to your students, just as an example. Or it could be a community or institutional goal. So maybe there's an art museum on campus and you're an art historian and have been asked to write the catalog, the exhibition catalog for that, for a new exhibit, or other kinds of institutional goals. So in other words, we accept a broad range of projects. What links them all is humanities research. The award amount is $5,000 up to $60,000. And on the images I have for you are two awards had supported in part these books, both applicants from HSIs. The first is Peter Limbrick, and he's at University of California, Santa Cruz. And the second is a scholarly edition by two different scholars. Naomi Stubbs applied through LaGuardia Community College and received 2 months of full-time support for her part of this project. Looking at another option for individual scholar funding at NEH is the fellowships program, which is actually, I believe, the longest program we've had at NEH. It goes way back to the beginning years of NEH. And it has an overlap, certainly, with the Awards for Faculty at HSI's program. It's the same kinds of projects can be supported, such as books and monographs and databases, translations. It would not support an undergraduate course revision, or depending on the community or institutional goal, it would depend whether it would be eligible in this program. But so there's a lot of overlap, in other words, between these two programs. A difference between these two programs is the amount of support. It's 6 to 12 months rather than 2 to 12 months, and this must be full-time work in the fellowships program. And again, we have two examples that resulted from some support from NEH fellowships. The third, I'm going to turn over to Meaghan because this is directly in her wheelhouse and she can give you all the details.
Yeah, so this is the NEH Mellon Fellowships for Digital Publication. The Mellon Foundation supplies part of the funding for this. These publications, this fellowship program targets individual scholars whose work needs to be published digitally to convey their argument. So in some ways, this program looks a lot like fellowships. The awards are $5,000 a month. The award period ranges from 6 to 12 months. So exactly the same in that way. But we would ask you to read the application materials carefully because there are some pretty big differences in how you apply. So for example, the application for the Mellon Fellowships requires you to submit an appendix with wireframes or screenshots of your proposed digital project so that evaluators can sort of picture why a digital publication is necessary. Generally, digital publications are necessary for this program because you're working with something that requires audio-visual materials to make sense, interactive diagrams or data collections, or are looking at massive amounts of textual data that need to be digitally curated and arranged so that your scholarly annotations can have the most impact. So we're happy to take questions about this. We're doing drafts for this program as well. I think we should probably mention we don't do drafts for the main fellowships program. It's just so huge. We would need an army. If anyone has one, we're open. But yeah, no. But for the Mellon fellowships, we do read drafts, and the deadline for that will be again, it's about 6 weeks before the deadline in April, so that'll be sometime in February.
Okay. And our last example of a fellowships program for an individual scholar is the public scholars. It should say scholars at the end of that. We used to have it, we've changed the name. And the difference here, again, there's some overlap. It looks similar in the sense of the funding structure and the award periods. You can work full or part-time, but it's only up to 12 months, whether that's part or full-time. The deadline has been changed this year, so if you've had this on your radar, just be aware that the deadline has been moved to December, so that's coming up fairly quickly. And the other thing, that the big distinction between why you would apply to this versus fellowships is this is really in support of projects that are intended to reach a broad general audience in the humanities and bring them well-researched humanities books. So the audience is different. There are also some differences in the what you need to submit in terms of and what your publication history should be. So you need to have published already a book, or you need to have a record of publishing for general audiences in the way that you are seeking to write for a general audience for this project. So we don't fund, for example, dissertation revisions in this program. We would in the preceding programs that we just looked at, but not in this one. Also, we don't support, a book that's really intended for an academic audience, and it's more, certainly for specialists. So those are some differences with this one. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention a program that supports similar types of projects to fellowships. Actually, all of those, the programs preceding, you could consider also applying to summer stipends. Summer stipends is a program that supports 2 months of full-time research. It's a set award, so it's not a monthly stipend, of $6,000. Typically, scholars take this in the summertime, though you can ask to have it at a different time of year, but it is 2 full-time months. And it supports the same kinds of activities, travel, research in archives, revisions of a chapter. What's different about this program is it supports a smaller piece or a smaller project. Typically, we don't see many article projects in this because this is a question I get asked is, do you mean it would support an article? it could support an article, but typically scholars are working on a larger project. So maybe it's a chapter or two of a monograph. Maybe they're doing the archival research for a bigger book project. Maybe it's going to result in an article first, but then it might become part of a book. So the deadline for this one is September. We just had a deadline for this. And something to point out to you is that you do need to be nominated by your institution to apply to this. We leave the nomination process to the institution. It's an internal process. And if, however, maybe Linda or Mark would be able to speak to this about how this is done at the University of Illinois at Chicago. But typically, well, the requirement is that your institution's allowed to have two applications from your institution. So sometimes I know some institutions do something in the spring, some kind of internal competition, and select their two nominees that way. Other institutions do it in various ways. I don't know, Linda, do you know how the University of Illinois at Chicago handles this nomination?
We haven't done it for a while. We used to do it more actively, and we would solicit and then create a committee to review them and send them over. We haven't done it probably for 6 years, I think.
Oh,
and
okay.
That's partially because the OVCR, there were some changes in our context there. Who were active in it sort of pulled back, and so that was our feeder, and we lost the feeder.
Oh,
But
I see.
we're planning to start this back up.
Our Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research does handle this, and they do include it on their list of fellowships to which people should apply. One of the things that I've been speaking about with that office right now is how we can coordinate a little bit better so that it's not just added in as a lump with other mailings in other disciplines, but we at the Institute can really help to get the message out and also help cultivate good applications for that. So it's a work in progress, and we hope to be able to ramp it up a little bit more than we have in the past.
Oh, well, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And so I guess I just would urge all of you to be in touch with Mark and Linda about how the process works. And just to put a note in your calendar, if you're thinking of applying, that that process has to happen. So I have up here a deadline is September, but since you need to go through your institution, you should be thinking about this in, winter and spring and find out about the process at your institution. So thank you. With that, I'm going to turn over to Meaghan, who's going to talk about opportunities in the Office of Digital Humanities.
Yes, so our Office of Digital Humanities supports a lot of cutting edge work with a focus on tools, platforms, and methods that can serve broad audiences in the humanities. If your project aims to develop a new plugin, a platform, or a piece of software that many different researchers could use, this is the place to go. And this is the distinction between something that might go to ODH versus something that might go to other divisions. So if we go to the next slide, I've got a couple examples here of the kinds of things that ODH does. Computational methods and techniques, research on digital culture from a humanistic perspective. So if your research is on how algorithms function in culture, that would be an ODH topic potentially. International collaboration on computationally intensive humanities and social sciences. What you're not seeing here are things like building an online repository of documents about the Underground Railroad, right? Because if you're doing like a scholarly edition of documents from the 19th century, that might actually find a home in scholarly translations and editions in the research division. And likewise, if you're gathering a lot of primary source materials and curating them, that might fit better with a grant in our preservation and access division called the Humanities Resources and I always get this wrong, and I had one. Humanities Collections and Reference Resources, HCRR. So it's really a good idea to sometimes if you have a digital project, to talk to a program officer, and maybe we can help you find the best fit for your project. If we go to the next slide. The best known of the Office of Digital Humanities grants are the Digital Humanities Advancement Grants, also known as DAG, because we love acronyms. These come in 3 levels. Level 1 is a foundations grant. This is sort of experimental and exploratory. It's up to $50,000 and up to 24 months. And it's for things that you can take chances on when it comes to digital encoding. Alpha prototypes, exploratory workshops, blue sky initial planning. This is their most flexible grant level. The level 2, or the implementation level, is up to $100,000 and 24 months. For the level 2 grants, you should already have a project with well-defined tangible outcomes. Usually there's some preliminary work that's already been done, whether at the NEH granting or through other money granting. And for this one, there needs to be a really solid work plan. Level 3 grants support scaling up or expansion of established projects. These must have completed a prototyping phase and must demonstrate project success. Evaluators are looking to see what the applicant has already done as preliminary work and that they have learned from it, whether that's a level 1 grant or work done outside the NEH. These are really significant grants, and our evaluators want to see projects that have carefully considered user needs and accessibility and have worked out plans for both dissemination and documentation. It should probably you just be clear from this that these funding levels that these are multiple person grants. These are all team efforts, and clear documentation of who is doing what and how everyone fits into the project is also important. If we go to the next slide. The Office of Digital Humanities also funds regional and national training in DH, and these are courses that are put together by the applicants. The maximum award for an applicant who's running one of these courses is $250,000. But I wanted to mention this also so that you're aware of the kinds of things that the Institutes for Advanced Topics in the Digital Humanities offer. So you might want to think about actually taking one of these courses as a first step to exploring a new digital project. This is the last round of funding, so these are courses that were offered in the past year. Things like the Advanced Digital Editing, Modeling the Text, and Making the Edition took place in Pittsburgh and offered coursework in Textual Encoding Initiative XML encoding and how to leverage that to make digital editions that were flexible and reliable online. And from after that, I'm going to hand it back to Mary for the next one.
Great. So this is just going through. So we've talked about the Division of Research Programs, some of the individual grant opportunities, and Meaghan's taken us through Office of Digital Humanities and some opportunities there. The last area that Mark asked us to talk about was in the area of challenge grants. And challenge grants are really strengthening the humanities through infrastructure and capacity building, which is the name of our current challenge grant program. They're bricks and mortar types of projects and have a long-term impact on the humanities. And the challenge aspect of it has to do with fundraising, so I'll talk about that in a minute. We currently have a one grant program called the Infrastructure and Capacity Building Program, and we support 2 types of projects in this program. One is capital projects, which can help with the bricks and mortar aspect of a project, so restoration or renovation of facilities that are used for humanities activities. I have an image on the screen, which is from Chicago, and it's the National Public Housing Museum, which recently was awarded a $500,000 infrastructure and capacity building grant to work on the permanent site in the only remaining building of the Jane Addams homes on Chicago's near west side. So maybe some of you are familiar with that building, and that was a recipient of one of these awards recently. The other type of project that can be supported through the infrastructure and capacity building is digital infrastructure for digital scholarly projects and platforms that are in need of, significant updating, rebuilding, making it usable in contemporary interfaces. So those are two areas. The application deadline for this program is in May. They have in the past read drafts for this program. Usually those drafts have been due in March or so you can put that in your calendar if you're interested in this program. The maximum amount that you can be awarded through this program is $750,000. It's our biggest award, I believe, at the endowment. To receive that, and this is where the challenge part comes in, there needs to be fundraising to receive. So federal matching funds, you have to raise and certify funding from non-federal third-party sources. So that's the fundraising piece of it. And to look at how does the fundraising, what is the match amount? So how much would you need to fundraise to receive, for example, $750,000 or be awarded for that? You can see that we have a 3-to-1 match required for projects up to $500,000. So with the example I had in my last slide of the National Public Housing Museum, they would need to raise 3 times the $500,000 in order to receive the $500,000 from the NEH. So they would be raising $1.5 million to receive that $500,000. 4-to-1 match for projects that are larger than that amount, up to 750. And we do have also a 1-to-1 match for 2-year colleges, HBCUs, TCUs, and HSIs. So the notice of funding opportunity is not available for next year's yet, because the recent deadline was in May, which means usually we try to have our notice of funding opportunities as an agency go up 60 to 90 days before a deadline. Sometimes we run a little closer to the deadline than that. But I would check there to see for any changes or updates for this and all of our programs. Okay, with that, that kind of ends our discussion of programs, the brief look at some of our programs. And with that, we were going to turn to take a little look at what happens with your application once you submit it, whether you're submitting to challenge grants or you're submitting to a fellowships program. How does the review process work at NEH? And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Meaghan.
Well, you're hopefully inspired now, and we'd like to turn our attention to some of these information about how the process works and some tips for improving your probabilities. Many of these tips can help you in applying to other foundations and grant funding bodies as well. So some of these are going to be a little bit generic, and some of them will be a little bit more specific to us. This timeline shows you the different steps your application goes through after submission. If you should probably think about the timeline of your application from submission to notification and work backwards from when you are thinking you might need the money. The grant process is quite long, about 7 months. And I'm going to use fellowships as an example to give you some more specific dates. So the next submission date for fellowships is April 14th, 2021. Fellowships has a 2-level peer review. An initial panel reads the applications online and provides us with recommendations. About a third of that initial submission then moves on to the second stage of peer review, where panels convene, probably virtually this time, sadly. Panels convene and discuss the applications in detail. Staff then prepare recommendations in early fall. The NEH's National Council on the Humanities, which meets 3 times a year, reviews the staff's funding recommendations in November, and the chairman of the endowment makes the final funding decision shortly thereafter and notifies, and he's the only one who gets to actually make the decision. His notifications to applicants are sent out in either late December or early January. So you would apply in April, but not find out until early January about whether you had gotten the fellowship. If we move to the next slide. We ask our peer reviewers to consider 5 evaluation criteria, and only these criteria, when evaluating your applications. The intellectual significance is sometimes considered a leader among equals among these criteria, but each of them is important, and we ask each of the panelists to consider your application in relation to these criteria as they evaluate. They often provide detailed comments in relation to each criteria. Next slide. Panelists provide both a rating and written comments. You may request your comments, whether you are successful or not successful, and these comments often include helpful tips for revision or recommendations for the project going forward. So we do recommend that you contact us and ask for these comments after you get your results back. Next slide. So now the tips part. We recommend that you start early. This is particularly important for any grant application, whether it's us, Mellon, Sloan, you name your organization, start early. Part of this is finding the right program. You can read the notifications of funding opportunities. You can read sample applications on our website. And you can actually talk to us. We do take emails and phone calls. Once you have found the right program, we recommend that you investigate grants.gov. People sometimes have trouble making a profile on grants.gov, so trying it early and making sure that you understand the bureaucratic system is very important. Read the guidelines, so that's the notification of funding opportunity, and the samples. They can show you how other people who are successful, all the samples are successful samples. They can show you how they approach the application. And do contact us. We are open to questions, and we are easily discoverable. And next slide.
Okay, and with that, Meaghan, we're switching, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Great.
great. Thank you. Thank you. We divvied up the slides so we had time to talk with you, both of us. So with that, I'll take a look at some other aspects of the application process and tips. And this slide, we have make your case. As you know, an application narrative is a different document than a book proposal or other kinds of genres. And so it's its own genre and can be a little bit tricky to get it. I would start. So we showed the evaluation criteria as a sample a few slides back, and Meaghan pointed out the significance of the humanities being an important criterion. I would just say that all of our programs have the criteria. They're all in the notice of funding opportunity. And I would start there when you are looking at making your case in your narrative. And the other reason for that is the peer reviewers are going to be using those criteria to evaluate your project and your proposal. A few other aspects is the significance. Again, that's really important to make that very clear to your peer reviewers, why your project matters, why is it important. And they need to be convinced, particularly on that point. One thing that can help with that is providing context. So another thing to keep in mind is that peer reviewers will come from a variety of perspectives in the humanities, but they're not likely going to be all specialists in your field. So you need to be able to write that for a broader audience of humanists and show the significance through that. So some indication of how your work relates to other work in the field and how that will make a difference or change the field or add to the field and so on and so forth. The next point is making it sound interesting. That might sound funny, but it's true that panelists will be reading. It depends on the program and the size of the application narrative, but you might have 35 applications that a panelist is reading. So those that are clearly written and interesting and understandable to non-specialists as well as the specialists, it's a good tactic to take. And then lastly, making sure to spend time thinking about your work plan, what you're going to do with the time and the funding. None of our individual grants require budgets. So so that's not what a work plan refers to particularly. It refers to, what you will do with your fellowship time, for example. So if you're applying for 12 full-time months, break those months down into smaller increments, maybe 1 to 2 months. If you're going to visit archives, you can name those archives and what you'll be looking at there. If you're going to revise chapters, you can explain which chapters you're going to revise and how that fits into the project as a whole. So you want to be able to convince your peer reviewers that you have a realistic work plan. It's appropriately ambitious is a phrase I use to think about it is, not too pie in the sky and unachievable, but also not underwhelming. So that's important. These are federal tax dollars, so the panelists and the NEH want to know how that time would be spent. With that, I would also just draw your attention to the audience, and I said a bit about that previously, but if you think about the review process that Meaghan took you through in terms of the life of your application, it comes in and it will have specialists reading it, it will have generalists reading it in the humanities. It has the staff looking at it, it has the National Council, and it has the chairman and his staff. So there's a big audience for your proposal potentially, and it needs to be conveyed to all of those different perspectives. Along those lines, clear writing is very important. Avoiding specialized, like overly specialized terms or jargon. If you can use another way to explain something that doesn't require, a 10-syllable word that only specialists would know, that would be a good idea. Explicitly addressing the criteria. So some applications will use the word significance, for example, to talk about that aspect. In the notice of funding opportunity, most recently we have given some more guidance in the notice of funding opportunity about your narratives and what they should include and how they might be organized. And you can use those to help you think about how to address that criteria, but using terms from that notice of funding opportunity. Again, thinking of your peer reviewers who are reading 35 applications or whatever they're reading, helping them, giving them guideposts to read your narrative. Sometimes a concrete example can be helpful to orient your project, also make it interesting and show how significant it is. If you have a really good example of something you've discovered in the archives that illustrates your larger point, for example. And showing that you know the field, that you know the context for your work. And then lastly, if there's possible questions, think about what those might be and offer, insight into that for the peer reviewers. For example, if you're doing something with case studies, you would want to answer the question, why those cases and not other cases? Or if you anticipate that some in your field might think, you have sort of it's a new approach, maybe it's a revisionist approach. What are some issues that scholars not agreeing with your perspective might have about it, and you can address those questions overtly. Budget advice. So budgets are not required, as I mentioned, for grants at NEH, and you shouldn't submit one. However, for most of our other programs, institutional grants, a budget is required. And it is an important document to get right, as you might expect. We do have samples for you to look at through each of our grant programs. So as Meaghan mentioned, the narratives are important to look at, but also if you need to do a budget, you can look at budget samples. Knowing what is and isn't allowed. For example, funding for food wouldn't be allowed, perhaps. So you'd want to make sure to check to know what is allowed, what isn't allowed. And then talking to a program officer or probably more so someone in the Office of Grants Management, who they're specialists in budgets, they're very happy to talk with you to help you figure out how to write the budget and make sure you're doing it correctly. And lastly, maybe I should put this first, is talk to your sponsored research office, because they are experts on budgets, and probably you have even more rules. So NEH has rules and your institution will have rules about budgets. So getting in touch early on with your Office of Sponsored Research to talk about the application in general, but also the budget. They'll be very able to help you with preparing that budget. And this, I believe, is going to be near the end of my slides on paying attention to the details. And let me just see here. Yeah, Meaghan already mentioned, which is really a good piece of advice, is to start early. So the process itself takes, for fellowships, say 9 months it takes to learn whether you were funded or not. And you can, for fellowships, for example, you could start January 1st your project, but you have had to write that proposal probably almost a year previous. Um, and then all of these details are important. So drafting early is important. I'd recommend if you're doing a fellowship application, for example, that you share it with colleagues in your field, but also colleagues not in your field, even family members, to get a sense of, well, what's coming across as clear, understandable, as the main point, my thesis coming across. Sharing it, with a lot of readers if you have occasion to do that, and getting their suggestions. Your bibliography is important. So now I'm talking more about all the individual fellowships. You're allowed a one-page bibliography, for example, in fellowships or awards for faculty. And you want to make sure that it is accurate and that you give kind of some good indication of the types of sources you will be using. Obviously, you can't include all of your sources. So it can be tricky to figure out, well, what should I put on that? But the peer reviewers will look at that. So be careful to proofread it. Any supporting materials, you don't want your application to be declared ineligible because you submitted it and then forgot that you needed to include a confirmation of institutional support, for example, which is required for the awards for faculty program. And so just make sure that, again, this all takes extra time. So just start early so that you give yourself plenty of time to do that. Proofreading, we all know about it and tell our students to do it and know it's important, but it is important, again, for these documents. That can really detract if you even have just a couple of things that aren't quite right. The panelists are reading 35, and it's a competitive it's competitive funding, and so you want to have that as quality proofreading. And lastly, for fellowships, awards for faculty, the Mellon Fellowship for Digital Publication, all those, you have letters of reference that you figure out who you want to ask, and then we will send them a link to submit their letter. What I would suggest about that is just making sure to share your proposal with whoever is writing for you, so they are up to date on where you are with your project. And if you have any concerns or issues, so again, if you think there's going to be questions about some aspect of the project, you can also ask your referee to address that. That's another way to help handle that. The strongest letters know the project you're applying for and know where you are with it, as opposed to just knowing your first book or something like that doesn't pertain to this project. And then lastly, if you are not successful, hopefully you would be, but if you are not, they're competitive programs. Don't be discouraged. Please reapply. In fact, we have noticed that applications, there's more success on those applications that are resubmitted. One thing that you can do is request the reviewers' comments, the peer reviewers. At NEH, we send you exactly what the reviewers wrote. We have to take out anything that is of a confidential nature, but generally you see pretty much what they wrote. And you can use that. Our peer reviewers tend to be very generous with comments and with assistance, and you can use that to improve your project and your proposal. Another thing to do is to contact a program officer such as myself or Meaghan, and we're so happy to help you. We want to be here to help you and to talk about your project and to think about ways that you might revise it, and then resubmitting that application. Also, we read drafts, as Meaghan and I have been noting throughout the presentation, for many of our programs. So that ends our official slide deck. This is our contact information, so you can reach us through these emails, and be very happy to talk with any of you at any point at greater length about your project. And with that, if you have any questions, we're also happy to take questions now, if you do.
I will just ask, thank you so much, Mary and Meaghan. This has been so helpful and informative. And I will just ask people to submit questions to the chat. I guess we would prefer that rather than hand raising, which can sometimes get out of hand. We do have a question from M. Rabelais. And they're asking about the effect of the September 22nd executive order, which forbids a range of um, uh, discourse on federal dollars or projects that are funded by federal dollars. And the question is, what is the impact on the NEH grants and fellowships?
I can go ahead and take that. I would just say with that that you should call, the advice would be to call a program officer and talk about your project and to see if that has any relationship to that. Our programs continue and so on. So I would just say maybe be in touch with program staff specifically about your project so we can help you think through those questions.
Thanks for that. I had a question for you, something that's been on my mind about the capital project grants, and particularly around the issue of fundraising. And of course, this is something that I would be talking to our own development people about, but I was wondering if you folks have suggestions about it, just in terms of a timeline of successful projects that you funded. How have those tended to work? I didn't quite see that represented on the website, and I was just wondering if you had ideas about it for the matching, because have you seen people just kind of have a fundraising campaign, see what they're able to raise, and then look for the matching? Is that one model for it, or what are some other things that you've seen work?
I would say I would just preface this that I don't work with that grant program primarily. So I would definitely I'd be happy to put you in touch with the staff who work directly with that program, Mark, if you want to send me an email as well. I would just say that there is 10% of your requested funds can go toward fundraising. I believe that some projects will hire a firm to help them do fundraising, for example. You don't have to have the money fundraised prior to applying. If you have made strides in that regard, however, I think it might be a helpful thing to show. But I would definitely follow up with one of my colleagues who will be able to speak more specifically about that. That's a really good question. So I would just say I know that you can request funding to help with the cost of fundraising, up to 10% of that amount. And the federal matching funds are not released all at once either. So you have a time period to do the fundraising. And again, they'll have all the specifics about what exactly are those windows, because there are specific windows. Those grants generally last from 5 to 6 years. So they're longer, a longer time period. And the federal matching funds are released. So as you fundraise and receive a gift, that gift is certified, then the funds can be released. Some of the funds can be released. So I hope that gave you a little information, and I can follow up with a colleague if you would like.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And I can follow up with you about that. We have a question from Freddie Gonzalez. What are things to consider when thinking about applying for awards or faculty at HSIs versus fellowships, just a sort of general fellowship category, or can you apply for both?
Thank you. Those are such excellent questions. And Meaghan, please jump in if I'm dominating too much the response. I work with awards for faculty at HSI, so I can take a first attempt at answering that. But we used to have, you were able to apply to both fellowships and awards for faculty, but that policy was changed some years ago. So now it's correct. You do need to choose one of the individual fellowship programs. In terms of which one to choose, that can be a little bit more challenging, and really it is the applicant's decision to make. But we can provide more information about the programs and what things that you can think about. Um, the Awards for Faculty at HSI's program, there's a lot of overlap between that program and the fellowships program. If you are doing a book or a monograph project on any research topic in the humanities, you likely can apply to either program. If you want to do an undergraduate course revision that has a research component to it, or a community project that has a community aspect to it, or an institutional goal aspect to it, then I would think the awards for faculty might be certainly those are eligible projects in awards for faculty and perhaps not in fellowships. However, both programs fund projects in all of the disciplines in the humanities, whether philosophy or art history or U.S. history and so on. So it can be difficult. I would just say awards for fact. So on each of our landing pages at NEH, we have a different landing page for each grant program, and I would suggest you look there and start there. At the bottom of the page, we have the typical funding ratio. So how many applications we receive every year, and how many of those typically are funded. And at the moment, the awards for faculty program, it receives many fewer applications than fellowships, and the funding ratio is a little bit higher than the fellowships funding ratio. I think it's about the 10%, and fellowships might have been around 7 to 8%. The panels tend to be quite multidisciplinary in awards for faculty, and maybe you have some more specialists in fellowships. And again, that has to do with the size of the program, the number of applications we receive. Because if we receive lots and lots in a particular discipline, then there may be more specialists reading those because we have so many applications. So those are some considerations. There may not be a exact answer. You might be able to apply to either one, and it's just choosing which one you want to try for. I don't know. I hope that answers the question, and Meaghan may have something else to add.
Meaghan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, but I might take the next collaborative research question.
Great. Yeah, can you talk more about the Collaborative Research Awards? This is from Lisa Freeman, and the kinds of projects that are typically funded.
Sure. So collaborative research is actually coming out with a new notice of funding opportunities. So that program is actually changing a little bit in the next year. In addition to sections that we've had for a while, such as scholarly editions and translations, there's going to be there's going to be 4 different tracks to it in the next year. Scholarly editions and translations is one of our older ones. That's very familiar to a lot of people from things like the George Washington papers, sort of large scale, long term editing and editions projects. We're still going to have convening grants, which are grants about bringing people together. Those are one-off scholarly meetings, so not part of a yearly meeting for an annual society. Those are not eligible. But if you're, say, getting a group of scholars together to celebrate the anniversary of a major publication or to concentrate on a specific topic, that would be eligible for a convening grant. And the 2 new tracks, there's one for international collaboration, and there's one for digital projects, because we're sort of recognizing that a lot of people are coming to some of our digitally focused fellowship applications, and they're really working with a team. So the collaborative digital track will be an opportunity for people who are working with a team of people to construct a scholarly argumentative digital project, but they need a lot of different people with different skill sets. The kinds of projects that are typically funded are going to, the digital track is new, so we don't have a typical day yet. But we have seen lots of VR projects recently, and those tend to take sort of lots of complex skill sets. We've also seen large-scale argumentative websites using Scalar and Omeka that organize materials around a topic and have interpretive essays and apparatus that's presented in digital format. And if you want to see some specific projects that have gone through the program before, there's going to be samples on the project website. Does that help? Yay.
Meaghan, that reminded me of something else I would advise to the previous question about awards for faculty versus fellowships. Is thank you too. I learned about collaborative research. That was good. But also looking up what we have funded through both of those programs can also be something helpful to kind of see, the range of projects that are supported. We have a link again on the landing page for each grant program where you can see a list of what's been funded through each program. So, and that goes for collaborative research too.
Thank you for that. If we don't have any more questions here, I don't want to keep you folks too much longer because we're going to move on to talking about our internal fellowships. So I'd like to thank both of you for taking the time to speak to us today. The presentations were really informative, and thanks for staying to answer the questions as well.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
And hopefully you'll be getting some great applications from us.
I do. I hope so. Please be in touch with myself and Meaghan and send us some drafts or ask us if there are drafts and what else questions you might have. We'd be really happy to hear from you. Thanks for the opportunity, Mark and Linda. It's been very nice.
Thank you.
Thanks for the chance to chat with you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. I'm now going to be turning to talk about the Institute fellowships and some of the things that we're going to be talking about will be picking up on some really helpful hints that that we've already been talking about with respect to the NEH fellowships. So there will be, a few pointers that will be repeated. And the reason why they're repeated is because they do apply for a lot of humanities fellowships, including research libraries, the ACLS, and the National Humanities Center, and other external fellowships. So there are some pointers that are more or less common among those fellowships, although there are a couple of things that are particular to UIC, and I'll try to point to those as well. So thanks for your patience. I'm sorry that I was late in coming in and didn't even get to introduce our speakers. So first, I wanted to talk, I'm going to try to get through this pretty quickly so that we can have some questions. But first, I wanted to briefly talk about our procedures, which is that we do have our application forms for the fellowships currently online. And so if you have questions about those, you can definitely direct your questions to us. When the applications are submitted, our due date. Linda, what's our due date on the applications? I'm forgetting. Oops, you're muted.
I know. The 9th of November.
Not November 9th.
Monday the 9th, yes.
Monday the 9th, thank you. When you submit your applications, we have an executive committee at the Institute of 6 faculty members across the humanities, and we actually have the members listed at the Institute website, and we have our archive of executive committees so that you can see who has been on them. They tend to be chosen from the winners of past fellowships. And so when you win a fellowship, you can be pretty much betting on our asking you if you will eventually serve on the executive committee. And we together examine and judge the applications. And we take a full day to do it, and every single application gets fully considered at length and in detail. So we don't have anything like a sifting through applications and throwing some out for one reason or another. Every single one is carefully considered. So I think that's important to be acknowledging from the get-go. I would say that it's really important to read the directions very carefully for the fellowships. And we do have a page where we do list our requirements for the fellowships. And as you can see, we ask for 1,500 words in length. And so I would just emphasize that you keep to the word length. If you're a little bit over, that's fine. But I will say that people do notice if you're a lot over. And keep it to double spaced, and all of the things that we like to see in our students' papers pretty much apply for the fellowships. We list a number of other things to notice here, and rather than stay in the share screen, I'm going to stop the share just because I'm going to be systematically more or less going through these. So yes, pay attention to that word length. And one of the things that we don't give in that list of directions is a detailed sense of how you're supposed to put the proposal together. We leave that very much up to you. How much would you like to spend telling us about the project in a general way versus how much time would you like to spend going through chapter by chapter? We do leave that up to you. However, I do think that it's good to give a sense of the general scope of a project. And I also think it's a really good idea to give the readers on the executive committee a sense of what your project looks like chapter by chapter. Give people a sense of how your project is built, because people like to just have a snapshot sense of what is in the project and how you're constructing it. And also, of course, positioning your project with respect to other work in your field. And that's related to the issue of the bibliography and what a bibliography is for a fellowship application. And I'll get to that in a second. But one of the things that comes up repeatedly, or it's a question that comes up repeatedly, is what is a Humanities Institute project? And you will notice by looking at our projects for this year that our projects that we accept at the Institute have become increasingly diversified over time. And it's not correct to look at yourself as a humanist because you come from a specific department. We welcome applications from a range of departments, but we do want humanities-oriented projects, no matter where you're coming from. And what that means, we do have an NEH-generated statement about what the humanities are, but in general, humanities projects are typified by the historical, contextual, and or theoretical work that tends to typify all work in the humanities. And I think, history, context, theory, those, and it can be a combination of those. It's often, one or two. But I think that that reflection on the context within history, society, or culture, and some broader theoretical conversation is really important for any work in the humanities. Lots of people submitting projects do field work. They're doing research on current problems, and therefore there's an empirical element to what a lot of people are doing at the moment. We have at least two people, Andy Clarno and Cecilia Gurusamy, who are doing those projects that involve a significant amount of field work. But that doesn't exempt them, obviously, from doing humanities work. It just means if you are familiar with their work, and you will be once they present it at the Institute, you'll see that they do have that broader humanities emphasis, even when they're doing a significant amount of empirical work in the social sciences. I think that is part of the overview that we're looking for when you're thinking about the project and situating it with respect to your work. The question of audience that Mary was mentioning with respect to NEH fellowship projects is also an important consideration for Institute for the Humanities fellowships. Be aware of the fact that our committee is always from across the humanities, social sciences. We have a member from CADA. I think it's important to be thinking about this not because the account of your project shouldn't be specialized. All projects are specialized, but it's important to just realize that the readers of your fellowship proposal won't necessarily be aware of the research in your particular field, and just doing a little bit of walking through of the important issues in the field and how your work contributes to your field for an audience of non-specialists is the way to go with this. I don't think that I'll add anything to that question of audience, but I will say a little bit more about the bibliography, which has some bearing also on the NEH proposals, and really for any fellowship project that you would be applying for. Many people wonder how you do a bibliography because we are only asking for one page. You can single space the bibliography, that's okay. Most people do that. But it's still short. Even if you submit a single space bibliography, it's a tiny sliver of what you're actually doing in your project. So I recommend that people think about your bibliography as a portrait of the research that you're doing in your project. And like any portrait, it has some things left out, you're taking out a great deal of detail, but you want to represent your project through the bibliography. So representing the range of source material that you have is a good thing to be thinking about. And how do you represent that range without actually listing every single work, which you absolutely cannot do? Because it's an interdisciplinary committee, and this is perhaps not, this is distinctive for an institute proposal, and also can have some bearing on some interdisciplinary fellowships like the ACLS. I think it's important to realize the conversations that are outside your field. So just be aware of the fact that conversations about one thing or another are taking place across many fields of humanistic inquiry. So if you are a social scientist, the important texts about race and racism are going to be very specific related to the project that you're doing. But of course, there is writing on race and racism everywhere across the humanities, and you probably can't read it all, but it's a good idea to be aware of the broader conversations happening across the humanities, and and if there's something that is crying out for your attention in relation to your project, you might want to give that a look and give it a nod either in the text of your proposal or in the bibliography. The last thing I'll mention and then open things up for any questions that you may have is the issue of letters. And many people, when they're applying for fellowships, have questions about what the letters should look like, or where, more particularly, where they should come from. The letters are always giving an account of your past work as a scholar, and they should speak to the present project. Occasionally, people have had questions about why is a letter being written from a scholar, a letter in your dossier from a scholar from outside UIC. Why is that letter not talking about your current project? Well, often it's because you forgot to share your proposal with your letter writer, or you just didn't manage to do it in time. I think it's really good to share a draft of your proposal with a person writing a letter so that they can speak to the direction of your work, both in the past and in the future. As for who the letter writers should be, it should be someone who knows your work well, who is not a friend, and who is not a UIC colleague and never has been a UIC colleague. So someone who was once a UIC colleague and moved away should not be fair game for a letter. It should be someone who's not a personal friend or a present or former colleague. But that selection is huge. Beyond that, it should be someone who is familiar with your work, and can be. It's probably not great to have a co-author on an article, but that's certainly not impossible. Especially, in some disciplines, there is a lot of co-authorship. But certainly a collaborator on a conference or a conference panel, or any other research activity, those are possibilities as well. But the key here is to have someone speak in detail about your work who's not a personal friend and not a present or past colleague. And that's a lot of people to consider in there. So I'm going to stop here because we don't have too much time left, and I want to take any questions that you may have about this. Linda, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't think of anything specific that I need to add. I guess if people have questions about looking at other proposals, which we've done in the past, and we are able to share some of those now if people ask, that's the only thing I could think of that people would be wondering if it's even possible now.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, Linda. In the past, we've allowed people to come to the Institute and request to review proposals from the past. And we don't let people take them out of the Institute, but we do allow people to just look at them, the paper proposals within the Institute. What we are now doing, we've gotten permission from people who have submitted proposals in the past. We have gotten permission to give people access to proposals in a box folder. So if you would like to review past fellowship proposals, you can be in touch with Linda and she'll give you permission to review the proposals in that box folder. Ralph is asking, can we be working with a collaborator who is an independent scholar? If so, how should we discuss this? Ralph, I think that's something that you and I can talk about together. I think there's a great deal of flexibility that is permissible within fellowship proposals. And I don't think that we have any interest in just shutting down anything automatically like that. So I think that, depending upon who the collaborator is and why, I think that it would be something that we'd want to talk about. We just, as an example of ways in which people have been very creative with these things, as many of you know, Andy Clarno's project involves several graduate student collaborators, and he's going to be presenting with one of them, his project, on October 20th at 4 p.m. And so, this is a project that involves graduate students. So, we not only permit the flexibility and creativity, but certainly encourage it. And I would welcome a conversation about that. Anything else?
Hey, Mark.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi. I know I've seen in the past that I feel like I saw that there was a fellowship given for creative projects. Is that a possibility?
Yes. Thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we have given a fellowship for creative work, and we've had submissions that didn't get funded, but were nonetheless on the cusp of being funded. So I think that unfortunately they didn't quite make it into those accepted, but they were almost there. And so that's just to say that we welcome the submissions, and we also would be eager to fund more creative work in the future. And so I think I will just say a word more about that. And so I think that we're different from the ACLS in that respect, which is not quite the same way about the creative work. For us, it's important to connect the creative work to the aspects of humanistic inquiry that I was mentioning. And so it should be the job of your proposal to connect your work to conversations that are happening within the humanities, within the humanistic disciplines. And, knowing your work, this is something that you're fully prepared to do. So the question is just, framing it in ways that show the impact on discussions in the humanities. And what that doesn't mean is that your project needs to be something different in order to fit into the fellowship, but rather it should be framed in such a way so that it would be a humanities project. And I'd be happy to discuss that further.
Great, thank you.
Well, we're at 11:30. I will just add that I am always happy to look at proposals, to just review drafts of proposals and give you suggestions on them. And and also very happy to have conversations, even if you're not quite at the draft stage, to discuss what is going to be a good humanities project, what's the best way to frame the issues that you're interested in writing about, and how to pitch a really good research project, because everyone is doing good and interesting projects, but how to pitch it in the right way for a proposal either here at the Institute or for an external fellowship. So happy to talk about all of that stuff. Just email me at mcanuel at uic.edu. So thanks to all of you for joining us, and I will see you at an Institute event very soon. Be well and be safe out there, okay?
Bye, thanks.
Bye. Thank you, Linda.